Execution, Blake was forcibly struck with a bitter realization of how perfectly useless his death would be. After an excruciating wait of 20 minutes, a jeep carrying 2 North Korean Army officers arrived. But instead of overseeing an execution, the officers ordered the vehicles to resume driving north. The prisoners were alive, but their ordeal was only beginning. Blake and his fellow captives were taken to the northern town of Manpo, nestled on the banks of the Yalu River on the frontier with Manchuria. Over several months, their group grew to include Turkish and White Russian businessmen and their families who had been detained in Seoul. More Western clergy, including elderly French priests and nuns, were also rounded up from across Korea, as well as several journalists, among them Philip Dean, the dashing and cocky correspondent covering the war for the London Observer. The civilian prisoners, now numbering about 70, were being held near a camp holding 777 American prisoners of war, soldiers from the 24th Infantry Division units overrun by the North Koreans at the start of the war. The POWs were in dreadful condition, still wearing the summer fatigues in which they had been captured during the initial weeks of the war, and many now without shoes. These were not battle-hardened veterans of World War II. Most were poorly trained and badly equipped conscripts who had been on cushy occupation duty in Japan before being sent into the fight. They had been taken out of this paradise and thrown into the hell of the Korean War, Blake observed. The civilian prisoners were shocked by the haggard and emaciated appearance of the POWs, many of them infested with lice. These ragged, dirty, hollow-eyed men did not look like any American soldiers that I had ever seen, recalled Larry Zellers, a lanky Methodist missionary from Texas who had served as an airman in World War II. But in mid-September, the prospects for all the Western captives suddenly soared. One morning, while Zellers was drawing water at a well, a brave Korean schoolboy surreptitiously handed him a note reporting that General Douglas MacArthur, commander of UN forces, had turned the war around with a landing behind enemy lines at Incheon, triggering a massive North Korean retreat with American and UN troops in pursuit. 2 weeks later, the prisoners were overjoyed by news that MacArthur had recaptured Seoul and was driving north. Blake, like the others, believed liberation was at hand, and the captives debated how many days or weeks remained until they were freed. All were deflated when they learned in early October that they were being moved to more secure locations farther from the front. After 2 weeks at an interim camp, the prisoners marched up a mountain trail to Jui-am-ni, a derelict old mining town. But even at the new location, the sounds of approaching artillery and the disorderly bands of retreating North Korean soldiers who came over the hills pointed to a quick end to the war. It became clear to us that the North Korean regime was collapsing and the army disintegrating, Blake recalled. The front remained near. American lines were reported to be only 50 miles away, and freedom was tantalizingly close. Escape came naturally to Blake. During his 1,000-mile journey across Europe in World War II, he had jumped off a moving train in Belgium to evade German soldiers and trekked across the snowy Pyrenees on a mule trail. So it was no surprise that he was among a band of 8 prisoners who planned to make a break. The group persuaded 2 nervous North Korean guards to help them reach American lines, where they could organize a rescue attempt to free the rest of the prisoners. They set out south on the morning of October 25th, taking narrow mountain paths to avoid villages, and slept that night in a small valley. The next day, they encountered 3 North Korean soldiers moving in the opposite direction, who stopped to confer with the 2 guards accompanying the Westerners. The soldiers had stunning news of another turn in the war. Chinese forces had intervened to aid North Korea and had pushed back the Americans. The prisoners concluded that it was now too dangerous, indeed impossible, to get through to the American lines, Blake recalled. They returned to the camp. But back at Jui-am-ni, Blake despaired. "I do not want to die in North Korea," he told Jean Meadmore, a French diplomat who had become a close friend. By October 30th,